Welcome to the United Workers' Party's press conference. We have with us our political leader, Honorable Dr. Thompson County, the President of the United Workers' Party, Honorable Dennis Linton. We have in the audience Honorable Danny Luge, Honorable Ernie Lance Johnson, Honorable Isaac Baptist, and Mr. Soso Forozo Glenroy Coffee with us, and you members of the media. At this time, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you to our political leader, Dr. Thompson Fountain, to address you. Dr. Fountain.
Good morning to all of you. It is indeed a pleasure to be here with you as we begin today's press conference on the need for major changes to be made to the draft electoral legislation that is going before Parliament. Let me say again a very special good morning to the assembled press, to others of you who are gathered here, as well as to those of you who are listening and viewing this online. I will begin with a prepared statement, after which I will invite our President, Mr. Honorable Dennis Linton, to give you a bit more information on the struggles that we've been through, tracing the historical struggle that we've engaged on for electoral reform, and then we'll open up for your questions. Last month, the public was made aware of draft legislation aimed at revising existing election laws in Dominica. These followed months of prolonged public engagements, rallies, and debate over the need for electoral reforms in Dominica. It was also presented after the government spent over $700,000 to hire the former Chief Justice of the Caribbean Court of Justice, Sir Dennis Byron, to prepare detailed recommendations for bringing Dominica's electoral laws up to date. While we welcome legislation allowing for equal access to DBS radio and the introduction for the very first time of voter identification cards, we however believe that the draft legislation in its present form have however fallen far short of public expectations, and in our view does not address some of the key issues which we believe are essential to setting the basis for free, fair, and credible elections in Dominica. Let us begin with the all-important matter of the cleansing of the voters list. The Caribbean Court of Justice, in its opinion on the conduct of the 2019 general elections in Dominica, which was issued on 5th July 2022, observed that, and I quote, electoral lists are central to legitimate and lawful elections. The duty to maintain the integrity of the electors' list falls to the Electoral Commission. In principle, the integrity of the electoral list is also what is really at stake. The view of this court is that non-compliance of electoral laws in this regard is an eventuality that, quote, the court must resolutely set its face against. The draft legislation of Electors Act 2024 allows for the confirmation of voters on the list of electors which currently exists. This list contains over 74,000 electors, some of whom have died, and others who will have an opportunity to confirm their status as electors. This is to be accomplished with a voter filling in a Form 31 that requires the elector's name and constituency where they were previously registered. It is of the view of the United Workers' Party that to allow voters to confirm their registration without the provision of some form of identification only allows for further abuse of the electoral process. We therefore request that the legislation be adjusted in order to allow for those seeking to reconfirm or confirm rather to one, provide some form of government issued identification, Secondly, clearly indicate your current place of residence. And thirdly, allow for severe penalties for a person who deliberately provides wrong information. The draft legislation also allows in section 13(7) that in the event of an election, which is called before the completion of the confirmation process, which is expected to last from 12 to 15 months, that the list to be used for such a purpose will be the partially cleansed voters list. Notwithstanding the constitutional requirement, which allows the Prime Minister to call elections anytime within the 5-year election cycle, and given the critical importance of guaranteeing free, fair, and credible elections, we stress the need to ensure that no elections will take place in Dominica before the confirmation period elapses and a new voters list is published. While our preference has always been and remains for a complete re-registration, we are of the firm belief that if the above recommendations on the cleansing of the list are taken into account, that this will help strengthen the confirmation process. We note with much concern the removal of the residency criterion for confirmation on the list, which was very much a part of the existing legislation. Section 53, subsection 3 of the draft legislation of the Electors Act 2024 allows for, and I quote, the applicant being a Commonwealth citizen is not entitled to remain registered if he or she, having departed from Dominica, appears no longer to be ordinarily resident in a polling district in the Commonwealth of Dominica. It is our view that this same definition of ordinarily resident must be applied to citizens of Dominica seeking confirmation on the voters list. Also, on the issue of residency, Section 9 gives power to the Chief Registering Officer and others assigned to verify whether an elector still resides in a particular polling district as well as the residency status. Other sections of the Act must therefore be amended to make it clear that persons can be removed from the voters list where they no longer meet the residency criteria requirements, including the case of a Dominican citizen who is no longer ordinarily resident in Dominica. Concerning the issuance of voter ID cards allowed for in the legislation, we urge that the required biometrics be part of the legislation with the minimum requirements stated to include a picture, address, polling district, constituency, and fingerprints. Notwithstanding the series of recommendations made in the Sir Byron report on the need for campaign finance reform, it is of much concern and regrettable that the draft legislation is completely silent in that regard. It is important for this very serious issue to be addressed in the proposed legislation and adopted into the draft proposals. Recommendations were also made in the Sir Dennis Byron Commission Bill, stipulating 65 as the age of retirement for the Chief Elections Officer, which we wholly endorse and which should be included in the draft government proposal. The United Workers' Party wishes to assure the people of Dominica that we are committed to ensuring proper electoral reform and that it becomes a reality before another general election is held. We understand it is critical and important in setting the basis for free and fair elections in Dominica. We also understand that the people of Dominica have waited a very long time to realize these reforms. We will therefore continue our efforts to educate the Dominican public and to take all necessary steps to ensure that after more than 20 years of agitation, submission of requests, and protest action, that we succeed in securing proper and formidable reforms. Let me therefore take this opportunity as we move forward to urge the government of Dominica to bring forward legislation that truly captures the essence of setting the foundation for free and fair elections. It is therefore important to take on board the key legislation recommendations coming from Sir Byron, as well as the several recommendations made by the United Workers' Party and the Electoral Reform Coalition with respect to residency, cleansing of the voters' list, campaign finance reform, among others. As political leader of the United Workers' Party, I call upon the Electoral Commission and its chairman, Mr. Duncan Stowe, to do their duty and submit corrections of the draft legislation to the government. This responsibility, as was clarified by the Caribbean Court of Justice, and which is enshrined in both the existing and draft legislation, rests squarely on the Electoral Commission, which is the body that is charged with overseeing the conduct of elections in Dominica. This all-important work should never be left up to a government, especially one which appears bent on staying in office, whatever the cost to the long-suffering people of Dominica. Finally, we call upon the people of Dominica to continue to forcefully insist that the government submits the desired legislation to Parliament for approval. The people of Dominica have waited a very long time for the passage of proper electoral reform legislation, and there is no doubt that we can wait a little while longer to get it right before it is brought to Parliament. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Now I will ask our President to give you some of the background.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fontaine. Nicholas George, General Secretary, all members of our National Executive here with us. Ladies and gentlemen of the media, it's been a while since I've been at an event like this. I'm seeing so many new faces. I'm minded to ask whether I am still knowledgeable about how I should speak. Should I speak so that because you listen fast, or I need to speak slow? What's up with that? We'll work it out. Ladies and gentlemen, for the better part of the last 2 decades, the struggle for electoral reform in Dominica has been against one man and his gang in government taking control of the electoral process and depriving Dominicans of the right to choose freely and fairly government of the people, by the people, for the people, with the votes of conscience of the people. And through these years of advocacy for reform, through these years of peaceful protest calling for the electoral process to be set to right order, for it to be made fit for the purpose of free and fair election, there has been no progress. At this point, you're almost getting the sense that we're shifting into reverse gear with what is before us. We're not really going forward. And you get the sense that the people of Dominica are being played for fools. They've been put on a merry-go-round, trickery, deception, false hopes, empty promises, while one man is systematically abusing, tainting, manipulating the electoral process to secure his winning legacy in elections in Dominica. And I want you to remember the March 27, 2008 email from Anthony Astafan to Roosevelt Skerrit. There's madness going on at the commission. So you need to call in the Dominican Labour Party nominees on the Electoral Commission, Richard Charles at the time, and Kondwani Williams. What was the madness? These guys are talking about reforms to include ID cards and complete re-registration. ID cards and complete re-registration. Madness going on at the commission. Because such reforms will undermine your re-election legacy, as the opposition will say, look, the commission agreed with us. Reform was required because of widespread fraud. 16 16 years ago. And then we come to July of 2022, after years of back and forth with the government, after the government, even in the name of reform, tried in 2015 or thereabout to introduce legislation to Parliament to legitimize bribery and cheating in elections. After, under pressure in 2019, the government went to another election without reforms, where they brought in the Commonwealth Observers, they brought in the OAS, they brought in CARICOM, to advise on what reforms would be taken to Parliament before the 2019 election. They got the recommendations and immediately set them aside, went to the 2019 election without reforms. We come to the 2022 sham elections, still no reforms, even though they had contracted, as the political leader indicated, Sir Dennis Byron, and drafts person for somewhere in the region of $700,000 of our money, people's money, for these reforms of the process. In 2022 July, the Caribbean Court of Justice told us, having looked at election matters from 2014 and 2019, there remain grave areas of concern about how the process for these 2019 elections was conducted. Future elections in Dominica ought not to proceed with these or similar taints. A taint is a poison. It contaminates something, it pollutes it. It makes it unfit for what it is supposed to be. So taints in an electoral process severely undermine the integrity and the legitimacy of elections, which is what we have argued all along, and we need to get rid of them. The CCJ told us as much. So the question before us now is, after all these years, do these pieces of legislation to go before Parliament, as Dr. Fontaine was indicating, do they do anything about removing the taints of the process that you can clear the way for free and fair elections? All through the years, we've been making recommendations for how you get to that. And in September, after all of the consultations of last year, after the submission of the Dennis Byron report, the United Workers' Party submitted, between the Registration of Electors Bill and the House of Assembly Elections Bill, submitted somewhere in the region of 14 recommendations for reforms and amendments to the laws. Out of those 14 recommendations, 12 of them were denied, 86%. So how do these proposals go to Parliament deal with the taints on the process? Taint number one, and Dr. Fontaine referred to it, the distortion of the right to vote. This business of persons voting for representation in the Parliament of Dominica, because that is what the constitutional right is about. The constitutional right is about voting for representation in Parliament. That's what the Constitution lays out. And to do that, you qualify by being 18 years and over, citizen of Dominica, and resident in a particular polling district. Mr. Skerritt has it right. He says that you cannot be living in Manhattan and expect a PAL rep in Dominica to be representing your interests when the roads are potholes in Manhattan. So he knows what the representation is all about, and he knows what the connection of the representation is to residency, which is the qualification in the Constitution. So that they started that right to vote. And so, as Dr. Fontaine indicates, this problem we have with a list that is inaccurate, a list that doesn't really reflect who should be voting in Dominica, who is eligible to vote according to the Constitution, remains a problem. And this legislation doesn't correct it. Dr. Fontaine spoke about the list. Do you members of the media know that in 2019, we used the wrong list for the election of 2019? And do you know that the judge examining our petitions described it as a patent non-compliance with Section 17 of the Registration of Electors Act? That's what we're talking about. The judge, even though he struck out the case, he described the use of the wrong list for the election of 2019 as a patent non-compliance with the election law, the Registration of Electors Act, Section 17. So, we made recommendations consistent with the principle of voting where you ordinarily reside, as Dr. Fontaine indicated, and that recommendation was refused in favor of entitling overseas-based voters, not only resident in Dominica, to distort, defeat, or cause harm to the wishes of the voting residents of Dominica. We also recommended no confirmation on the register for voters overseas. We felt that was discriminatory according to Section 13 of the Constitution and allows for corrupt manipulation. And in this proposed registration of electors bill, there is indication that there will be overseas centers set up for confirmation. Mr. Scared is saying something else, but he's saying there will be no overseas confirmation, but the actual bill provides for there to be overseas confirmation. That now we don't see as a big problem, because all the Attorney General's office will have to do with this provision in the bill is to take it out, because Mr. Scared says there will be no overseas confirmation. Take number 2, voter fraud. Voting multiple times, voting in the name of the dead, voting with false identities. To remove the state, we have consistently recommended voter ID cards. The electoral reform consultant, Sir Dennis Byron, said to us on this matter, and I quote, "The introduction of voter identification cards to persons registered as electors supported with biometric data was considered one of the most important reforms by almost everyone. This was regarded as essential to eliminate or minimize a wide variety of fraudulent conduct at elections, including impersonation and multiple voting." So we have received one part of our recommendation, which is that there will be ID cards for voting. But remember, we have indicated, as Dr. Fontaine spelled out, what needs to be on the ID card. Biometric data, facial recognition, fingerprints, unique ID number, registration number, address, polling district needs to be on the card, not at the discretion of the Chief Elections Officer as the law now provides for, but prescribed actually in the law. They have denied that. So, we go on. Take number 3, election rigging, tampering with ballots, altering vote counts, having unlawful recounts. Do you know that when Dr. Fontaine lost the election, or quote unquote lost the election in Grand Fork in 2014, he had initially won it. And then they recounted until they got the result they wanted. These recounts until you get what you want is illegal, it's unlawful, but it's allowed to continue in the process, the electoral process, and nothing is being done about that. We have take number 4, bribery and treating. Offering money, gifts, other incentives to voters or election officials in exchange for votes or favorable treatment. The payment of air and sea transportation for voters living overseas, and the payment of entertainment for voters represent major deformities, major taints in the electoral process that have determined the outcome of elections. We know all about that. The Commonwealth Observer Mission to the 2014 general election cited multiple instances of treating and bribery, including the transportation of electors to the island to vote, among the reasons why the election was not necessarily fair. And to remove these things, we made recommendations that the House of Assembly election bill must be amended, at the very least, to clarify free entertainment treating as an election offense, and with respect to the offense of bribery, reflect the guidance of Halsbury's Laws of England that the payment or promise of payment to a voter of his traveling expenses on the condition expressed or implied that he would vote for a particular candidate is bribery. That recommendation, those recommendations were denied. Take number 5, corruption and the influence of big money. We need to regulate election campaign financing. That is necessary because money cannot be allowed to have controlling influence in our political system such that elections can be determined and or purchased by big money interests or criminal enterprise. Electoral reform must include solutions to the critical money in politics problems that are negatively affecting our elections. It's not about giving political parties money to campaign from the public purse, as was erroneously stated by the Prime Minister and repeated by advocates of the Dominican Labour Party during the election reform consultation. It's about the responsibility to reform and improve our campaign finance system with election laws that hold elected officials and wealthy special interests accountable to the people, and create a level playing field for fair competition and ensure that everyone plays by the same common sense rules. We had recommended that election campaign period begins at least 12 months before the election date. We had recommended limits on election campaign contributions. We had recommended a limit on election campaign expenditure by political parties at $50 EC per registered voter. And we had recommended declarations of campaign contributions and election campaign spending. All of those recommendations were denied. Dr. Fountain told you that the recommendations made by the reform consultant for campaign finance regulations to be included in House of Assembly elections were rejected wholesale. Absolutely nothing about campaign finance. Take number 6, abuse of public resources. This business of using state resources, such as public funds or government-operated facilities, to support a particular candidate or party. The Commonwealth Observer Mission again, in December 2014, believed that instances of abuse of incumbency played a part in the outcome of the election, which was not necessarily fair due to the apparent abuses of incumbency, including lack of impartiality in the provision of public services, and clear breaches of civil service staff regulation where public servants are openly politically partisan and assist in the distribution and provision of government services and goods. To remove this state, we recommended provisions to strictly prohibit using public officers, the resource of the state, and projects resulting from expenditure of public funds as campaign tools to corruptly, improperly, and unduly influence voters and thereby gain political advantage. Those recommendations were denied. Tip number 7, media bias. Skewed or unfair media coverage that disproportionately favors one candidate or party over others, potentially influencing public perception and voting behavior. And to remove this state, we recommended provisions in the House of Assembly Elections Bill for access to all media for all political parties. We recommended prohibition of all media houses, print, radio, TV, digital, electronic, from denying any political party or candidate paid time and or space for the broadcast or publication of the messages. And we felt that the law needed to obligate political parties to put on media houses a legal obligation that political parties and any independent candidate participating in elections have equal access to media services during the campaign period, and penalties have to be prescribed for non-compliance with the rules. And that recommendation was denied, except that some access to state-owned media, PBS radio, will be allowed. And finally, the taint of foreign interference. Attempts by foreign entities to influence the election results through hacking, disinformation campaigns, or financial contributions. And to remove this, we recommended that foreign persons, companies or governments, citizenship sales agents, and holders of government contracts financed by citizenship revenues should be expressly prohibited from participating in election campaigns and contributing either directly or indirectly to any candidate or party during a general election. We had the taint of intimidation and violence, as we saw in Margaret and Salisbury, more specifically, threatening or using violence against voters, candidates, or elections to influence election outcome. On the morning of the election, sleeping village of Salisbury, tear gas, and so on. So, removing these taints is crucial to ensuring free and fair elections, but unfortunately, precious little has been done. Now we hear the government is getting ready to go to Parliament to pass new and revised election laws that will normalize the formula of unlawful and corrupt electoral conduct that they have engaged to steal elections in Dominica. And that is not acceptable. All we wanted through this electoral reform process is to align our process with the requirements of free and fair elections with integrity as the backbone of democratic governance in our Commonwealth of Dominica. The new and revised election laws do not provide for the reforms we need, and so they must be rejected, and the government must agree that it is going to make the changes that the people need, as Dr. Fontaine has indicated, to ensure that process is fit for the purpose of free and fair elections. We will not accept what is before us. Much needs to change with it for it to get to the state where it will do what is it the people have wanted and have advocated for so long. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your presentations. At this time, I ask you to indulge me as I move the recording devices to the table so that the gentlemen would have to be coming back and forth to the podium to answer the questions of the group. Just 1 minute, please. At this time, you can ask your questions of any of the gentlemen seated.
Yes, Bishop Farrell, 95. My question to you, any one of you can answer. In terms of electoral reform, we know it is a topic that many Dominicans will get. It is something across the political divide has become the talk of the town. And so there has been word, because in the media we hear things on the ground, they are closer to the ground. There has been word from the public, from constituents who either are on the UWP side or the Dominican Labour Party, who sense an election coming. Seeing that we've just gotten draft legislation from the Dominican Labour Party on government, their version of recommendations, and that the United Workers' Party is saying that they are not in agreement with what has been presented to the public. What happens if elections is called within 2024? What is the response of the United Workers' Party?
Okay, we are 17 months since the last election in Dominica. 17 months into a 5-year election cycle. Okay, so we're not even halfway there. Still have over 3 years to go, 3.5 years to go before elections are constitutionally due. What we're saying is that this is more than enough time to get the legislation right. And as we have insisted over and over again, we should have no elections before those reforms take place. You may recall that we boycotted, we did not participate in the last sham elections of December 2022.
Right.
And the reason why we did not take part is because of the same lack of electoral reform. So as far as we are concerned, we have not moved any step forward in terms of correcting that problem. So the people of Dominica need to understand this. You elect a government to work in your best interest over 5 years. There's a reason why there's a 5-year election cycle. But it gives government enough time to do what is necessary by the people. We are saying that a key task of this government now is to do the reforms that are necessary so that we can be on a level playing field and we can all have democracy in Dominica. What we have right now is not democracy. It is simply a government trying to reinforce itself, not only reinforce, but force itself literally on the backs of the Dominican public. And I believe that the Dominican public should say enough is enough and should put their feet down and demand that those reforms take place before any elections are held.
Thank you, Dr. Compton. Another question to the President of the Electoral Workers Party. In terms of these reforms, we're still on that. Sir Dennis Pryor was pretty much hired. He was, according to multiple media houses, given the title, soon commission, because he was hired by the government basically to conduct an electoral study, which he did, and then provided draft legislation which could literally, according to one of his pronouncements, literally be taken to cabinet and deliberated on. And now we're seeing that these recommendations are quite frankly, I'm not taking any side professionally, but if I have to speak objectively, it's pretty much being cited. Almost $1 million spent from the Treasury. Linton, what's your comments on that as one of the political figures in Dominica?
Only to say that it's very unfortunate. The money has been spent, and it's not Roosevelt Skerritt's money or the Labour Party's money. It's money belonging to the people of Dominica for reforming our electoral process in the interest of the people of Dominica and their right to free and fair elections. And for example, for the government to reject out of hand, totally dismiss the proposals for campaign finance reform, campaign finance regulations that were included in the draft House of Assembly election bill by the consultants of Dennis Pryor. I just think it's reckless. It's a slap in the face for the people of Dominica because it's a matter we have been concerned about. It's a taint on the process that has to be removed, and they will do nothing about it. And part of the reason that nothing will be done about it is that the way things are is consistent with or good for the formula they have used to steal elections, and no campaign finance regulations is going to be allowed to interfere with that, so they don't come with that. And that is why we're saying we almost seem to have gone into reverse gear where this electoral reform thing is concerned, because I don't see how you can meaningfully be talking about electoral reform in 2024 without any element of regulation of campaign finance. Just don't see it. So it's very unfortunate.
I see we cannot play in diplomacy here. It's clear that this government has rejected the reforms from the Party. Is the United Workers Party going to lie or play dead and do nothing about what the people is calling? Are you guys going to play dead? You know Roosevelt Skerritt's playbook. He doesn't care what you think. If you want something, he's going to go for it. If Roosevelt Skerritt, as Ricky said earlier, he's going to call a stop election, everybody will be doing that. What are you guys going to do? Play dead?
You know that we represent a significant part of the electorate, and from my recent observation, a significant part now, the majority of the electorate now in Dominica who want change and who are simply fed up with this administration. So I believe that the people of Dominica will in good time do what they have to do to deal with this issue, because after all, the boss, the maître, c'est pas Skerritt qui maître. The people are the ones who will determine this. They're the ones that obviously who are going to put him out of office. And they're the ones who are going to insist on electoral reform. Because after all, they are the ones who have been hurt. So we are representing the people of Dominica, a significant part of those people. But at the end of the day, it's what the people want.
Yes, what the people want, sir. But I mean, you hear leadership everything. Are you going to lead from the front?
we have been leading, we continue to lead. The press conference this morning is an example of this. You know, what you need to understand is this: the electoral reform that we are fighting for is not only for our party this year. This is setting the foundation of democracy now and into the future. So that's why I say it's a fight in which all of Dominica should be engaged, including labor rights, including those who do not support us. Because this is a fight about Dominica. So people should not be of the notion that it is a UWP thing. It is not. Because whatever happens, we are going to win the next election. And when we do, then the legislation is there for the other party. All right, so it's important for us to understand that this is something that everybody has to be engaged with. Okay, so far from it, we are not playing that. We are advocating for the Dominican public. We are pointing to them serious areas where we believe should be included in the legislation. You know, like the campaign finance reform, and it's up to the public ultimately to decide what they want to do.
Can I make a piece of this?
Thank you. All right, Mr. Political Leader, I wanted to, the conference allows exchange. So, just as the media is asking questions, we can ask questions of the media in the conference. I want to ask Matt Peltier, are you going to let them play that? Are you going to, because, I mean, we have stood up this morning, and we have been standing up for years. We have kept this electoral reform necessity on the national agenda, and I guess it's taken a long time, but we've seen some attempts by the government to address it, which really have gone nowhere. So to your point, and I think I'm quoting you correctly by saying that the electoral reform recommendation of Sir Dennis Byron consultancy have been rejected by the government. Is that what you indicated? That's your position? Okay. I welcome that. I'm seeming to be on the same wavelength with you. The United Workers Party seems to be pretty much on the same wavelength with you. And we're in the fight. So the only thing I would like to suggest is that the media take this very seriously and help the people of Dominica to get what the people of Dominica deserve, which is a system that will allow for free and fair elections with integrity in Dominica. That's all we want. So I'm looking forward over the next couple of days to see how Matt Peltier does not lie down and play dead, but takes the fight to the government to ensure that we get these reforms. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
That system you're talking about, do you think it can be done by us in Dominica, or do we need some overseas intervention, some experts?
It can absolutely be done by us in Dominica.
Yeah, I agree. I think the people of Dominica are those who are the ones to pay the dues. All right, and notwithstanding the influx of voters from overseas, ultimately it's the people of Dominica who are the ones suffering. It's the people of Dominica who are feeling the effects of what the Haitian now call it pay à tomber. You know what pay à tomber means? The country has fallen. That's what the Haitians are saying. That's why they're leaving. So with a country falling, with a country crumbling, with a country where it is, the people are the ones here, the ones who are feeling the brunt. Yes, yes, yes. It is the situation that we're in, and that is the word. If you ask the Haitians, it's a saying by the Haitians in Dominica, right? It's not a saying. They're the ones, and that's the reason that they're given for leaving the country in droves. Pay and tomber. All right. So people are feeling the pressures. People are feeling the pain, and I believe that they're the ones too. Since they're the ones who stand to lose the most, I believe that it's the people in Dominica who should be rallying and who should be standing up to this government to ensure that we get those reforms.
Yeah, we have a number of lookers and viewers online. And one person is asking an all-important question. I think Mr. Linton touched on some of them earlier, but I guess just to be a little more specific, Gerald Vital is asking, what would be the least accepted laws and reforms of the Electoral Legislation Reform Act that would be deemed reasonably fair so that the UWP can contest the next election? What would be the the list accepted.
That's all. Dr. Fontaine opened up with the very important matter of residency, which is the fundamental criteria, qualification for being on the register of voter, that you must be a citizen of the country. So that residency now, that voting where you live principle, is critical. We have to start there because, again, to the observations about the list and the accuracy of the list, the legitimacy of the list must have people who have the right, the legal right to vote, the constitutional right to vote, right? And the Constitution provides that you can only vote in Dominica, you can only be on the list of voters if you are living in a certain polling district, Dominica. So when you no longer live in that polling district, when you have relocated overseas, Mrs. Carrot says you cannot be overseas and expect representation in Dominica, which is what you voted for. Your representation must be where you're living, where you're earning your living. Right? So we have a problem right there that has to be fixed. The government, with this legislation, is trying to move away from the disqualification of persons living overseas for more than 5 years and make it a situation where, as they campaigned for during the consultation process, once your name is entered on the register, then it will be always on the register. So you'll always have a situation where you have so many more persons on the voters register than persons who are actually resident in Dominica, which in itself is an absurdity. So we start there with the list of voters, with the distortion of the right to vote. That has to be fixed as one of the minimum standards. The question of ID cards, we have moved away now, happily, from this business of whether it's going to be a national ID card. It will be a voter identification card, but it must include, by law, by prescription of law, the features, biometric data, facial recognition, fingerprints. It must include unique identification number, voter registration number, polling district, address of the voter, etc. That's not the discretion of the Chief Elections Officer as the law now provides for. It's a prescription of law. So on these two, remember the email? Madness is going on at the commission. They're thinking of voter ID cards and computer registration. That's what we wanted, you know. ID cards, so we have to fix that. That's a minimum requirement. And we have to fix the total re-registration. The total re-registration, along the lines of what the Constitution provides for qualification to vote in Dominica, is what is going to set us on the right path. Then we need to get into other areas like the campaign finance reform. That is necessary. We have to fix the access to media, because what the government is saying now in the bill, okay, we'll let you all some time on DBS radio, but Kyrie FM or Q95 or Vibes can do what they want to volume. That's not our business, because it's not us. In neighboring countries, Antigua for example, the obligation is on all media, wherever you are. You cannot discriminate against political parties who come to you requesting time, or who have to have time on your station or space in your publications for their messages during the campaign time. We have also this question of bribery and treating. Big issue in Dominica. We need the law clarified in terms of free entertainment treating, and we need the law to be clear that when you pay for the transportation expenses of people from overseas to come here to vote, on the condition expressed or implied that they will vote for a particular candidate, that is bribery. So those are some of the considerations for a minimum program that's acceptable for reform before we say, okay, everything is looking like we can work with. Right now we have practically nothing. The government has basically given nothing on the agenda of proper reforms to make the process fit for the purpose of free and fair elections.
So, Mr. Linton, what I'm understanding from you in terms of a backup question to that, the idea of confirmation, the process of confirmation that the government is pushing and has put on paper, you guys are not interested in that process at all, in terms of confirmation? What are you saying?
Our
Total
recommendation is
re-registration?
for total re-registration.
Okay.
Dr. Fontaine has made some observations about the actual confirmation process that is proposed. And you know that the Prime Minister is saying one thing about overseas confirmation centers and something else is in the legislation, so they'll fix that. But our preference has always been and remains total re-registration.
Let me quote Mr. Prime Minister. He says, every time you guys ask for electoral reform, you have been asking for electoral reform for a while. And every time he gives electoral reform, this way, you guys are shifting the goalposts.
What about goalposts?
No, because far from it, I think we have been fairly consistent. If you go back to 20 years ago, what we have been asking for then, what we were asking for, that we're asking for now, we have not changed. The problem is that Mr. Skerry has not given it. He has not come anywhere close to what we believe, what the CCJ agrees is proper electoral reform, also what is in his own expert that was hired, what he's suggesting, and also best practice for the Caribbean region. So no, the goalpost remains. It's just that this particular player is still with his ball somewhere. He needs to come on that particular field. Let us play on this field. He's not there as yet.
Have you come in touch with the observers that were here to monitor the process?
No, Matt, I feel that I still believe that our battle is with this government, and that's where the battle should remain. Observers come in just to observe an election, and that's rightly what they should be doing. But that is,
take recommendations and go on.
no, but these same observers who have been making recommendations for years and years and years. The same recommendations that we have endorsed, that were proposed by Sir Dennis, are the same recommendations that those observers have been making. And yet we are where we are. So it's not so much the observers. The focus has to be on the Prime Minister, on the Electoral Commission. These are the persons who are responsible for it, and these are the persons that we continue to hold their feet to the fire to.
Is Matt referring to the observers who came for the consultation?
Yes, in the consultation. Yes, we've just accredited Mr. Glenroy Coffey as a member of the media. So, sir, you can now ask a question.
As a bona fide elector, registered in the Rural Central constituency, and for those who want to research it and to agree that I am talking the truth, Derek Glenroy Coffey, registered in Rural Central. I have a concern regarding the whole process of electoral reform. In recent times, we have heard the Prime Minister stated that his government somehow is over with consultation. And I don't think he was speaking on behalf of the Electoral Commission, which of course is an independent body and is mandated by law to execute electoral reform on behalf of the people. So I hope by the suggestion of the Prime Minister that the Electoral Reform, the Electoral Commission will not abdicate its responsibility to continue to advocate on behalf of the people with respect to reform. What advice do you have for them? Because it appears that while the government, yes, of course, they may be over with consultation, but it doesn't let the commission forget that they have a draft legislation before them, and obviously a draft would mean that they are given it to look over, and obviously some alterations can be made. So I would like to know what advice you have for them, because I don't want them to drift too far away from what the Prime Minister said. The Prime Minister is not the Electoral Commission. The Prime Minister has no jurisdiction over the Electoral Commission, except that the government, of course, will make resources available with respect to making the budgetary allocation requested by the Commission. So I just want to
Let me follow up with you. I also said that they can make the comments, but he has no obligation to implement the comments.
Right.
Interesting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I just want to get
Yeah, in my opening statement, I made it very clear that as far as we are concerned, in the United Workers' Party, the Electoral Commission has a responsibility to the people of Dominica, and their responsibility is to oversee the conduct of elections. And part of that responsibility means giving the correct recommendations to the Prime Minister. So we expect the Electoral Commission to play its part. It has to give the correct recommendations to the Prime Minister. And then the Prime Minister is supposed to take on board those recommendations. So that's what we're asking. We're asking that they meet over those changes. And also in terms of the timing, we are just 16 months, 17 months since the last election. We have time to do it, but we need to use that time to get it right. So I don't want this thing to be rushed, okay? This is not something that, you can just quickly do and get away with. The Prime Minister is still not yet on the playing field. He needs to come on the playing field, bring his ball and let us play on that playing field. He's not there as yet. And trying to rush the process is not the right thing. I think there's enough time to do those reforms, to do the correct proposals, let the parliament that exists now put that into law and let us move forward to implementing it.
But it's interesting the question you raised, Matt Peltier, because, and Glenroy Coffey, the Electoral Commission has a specific responsibility on the Constitution. What the Constitution says insofar as a situation like this is concerned is that you're going to take legislation to the Parliament that has something to do with elections in Dominica. You have to send it to the Commission for review and comment prior to going to Parliament with it. And the Prime Minister has done that. But to your point, he has also indicated quite clearly, nowhere in the Constitution does it say that he has to accept the advice that is given. You see, I take my time with these things because it's important for people to pay attention to what's happening. This is our country, not one man's country, it's your country. And in the Parliament, the people especially, the people expect honorable conduct from those who represent them. And to me, it would be totally dishonorable of the Prime Minister to receive recommendations from the Electoral Commission that are in sync with making our electoral process free and fair. And he refuses them because he wants to go a different way. Now that means a man has established himself above us as Lord and Master to do what he wants while we sit down and say nothing. And I want to go back to Matt Peltier's term earlier, lie down and play dead. So no, we don't intend to lie down and play dead while any of these things are going on.
And then just very briefly on that as well, which is the same thing that we've been saying, and coming back to a question that was asked earlier about the calling of a snap election. It's the same kind of thinking. The Prime Minister will lose every shred of credibility if he were to call an election without electoral reform. Because electoral reform is not the passage, it's not even the passage of the reforms. It is the actual carrying out. So after the legislation, either the re-registration or the confirmation of the voters list must take place. That has to take a certain amount of time to be done. Now, if we were to do re-registration, that would probably take 3 months. It can be done in 3 months' time. And that's the reason why we are asking, because if this Prime Minister has any semblance of respectability, he will not call an election before the reforms are in place. Okay? Even putting it before Parliament is not enough. We have to make sure this carried through. Voter ID card issues, and after that has happened, that is when he can call elections. If he does that anytime before that, any credibility which he still has, I think, will be sadly lost.
Yeah.
Before you ask a question, I just want to draw something to our attention. We had a similar situation in Antigua a couple years ago. And the Honorable Baldwin Spencer was Prime Minister of Antigua. And he was about to call the general election, but he was informed by the Commission they weren't ready. And he held it back, and he made a public statement that he will not call the election until the Commission advises him that they're ready. And it included a total re-registration of electors in Antigua. So all around us in the Caribbean jurisdiction are examples of best practices on electoral reform. So apart from having this press conference here, we intend to inform those persons outside of our jurisdiction what it is that we're asking for. Because we had the experience in 2019 when the RSS came to Salisbury, one day before general election, on the advice and the request of the Prime Minister, Dominica's Prime Minister. We are now saying that we want certain basic things in our laws. You just ask the question. Now, the Prime Minister cannot bring the RSS here by himself. He must ask the other regional Prime Ministers their consent. So, if we are protesting that we want it done, what would be Honorable Mia Mottley's comment? To send troops here to suppress us when she's given that right to people in Barbados. And she's one of the people who was a consultant in 2013, 2014 here, who made similar recommendations to the government of Dominica. She was in the opposition, I think she was in opposition at the time. She's since ascended to the office, well, elected to the office of Prime Minister twice. So that which we are fighting for in Dominica has been legislated for the people of Barbados, Antigua, Jamaica, Trinidad, St. Kitts, Grenada, St. Lucia, St. Vincent. Why is it that we cannot have it in Dominica? And when we ask for it in Dominica, this very Prime Minister sent troops here to suppress us. So we are saying, we are giving these heads of government dossiers and our requests. We're asking them to read it. We're giving you, if you leave your email addresses with me, your phone numbers, we will give you the material that we're sending. We've sent some material to the Prime Minister. We will send more, because that's what he says, that the electoral reform process is now in the hot oil. It's already being fried. He has bigger fish to fry, and he doesn't have time for consultations. So he's saying he's not going to consult. Even if you send comments, he might not read them. But we will send comments to the Prime Minister. We're doing it now through you. And as the Honorable Emmett Lincoln has asked you, you have a civil responsibility as members of the media to dissect what is said to you here and what the man has said to you before, and inform the public of Dominica what it is. So you have a role, not just to air what we're saying here, but you have a role to make Dominica a freer place, because you exist in Dominica as well. Thank you.
I just have a comment just to strengthen the point that Mr. Nicholas George made, and two questions and I wrap. This weekend on the Civic Types program, we had Mr. Ian Hughes, that is the supervisor of elections in Antigua. And he basically confirmed that before any election is called in Antigua and Barbuda, the Prime Minister, whoever it is, normally often have some kind of discussion with the Electoral Commission in terms of its readiness to call it an election. So at least that is set in stone, as it were, in terms of precedence. Second, in terms of my question is, there is this scenario that the Prime Minister is trying to give to the Dominican public, that the reforms that we're talking about now, it is sort of hinged on his national budget presentation. That's the vibe I'm getting. And so there's this extra haste to sort of push things through Parliament in a way, I am saying, to suit him and his agenda. What would you guys have to say now to the Dominica public as to debunking that sort of misnomer out there, that these reforms must go ahead because the national budget has to make, monetary allocation or whatever. And that's one scenario. That's the vibe I'm getting. And secondly, after all is said and done, I believe it will boil down to the people basically demanding, and if needs be, stopping the government in their track, like the people did read that bribery and treating laws before that they wanted to enact. Is there anything afoot where the United Workers' Party is concerned, you guys in opposition, having a good chunk of the votes out there, is there anything afoot as it pertains to mobilization now? The further education, that medium is one, but the grassroots man may not be listening. Somebody may be in their garden now, you don't have an idea what is going on. Is there moves to bring that message to sufficiently mobilize the people so that the people can finally get what they want as it pertains to free and fair elections?
Okay, I'll respond to that is there is no reason to rush this before. This Prime Minister is a master of supplementary budgets, right? He can easily do a supplementary budget to accommodate whatever changes, whatever requirements there are in the legislation. So that's not an issue. Or he can even, in the budget, set aside a certain amount of money for the confirmation process or re-registration for the voter ID cards. That can all be in the budget and adjust it later on. So that issue that he must do it before the budget, I think it's just a question of trying to fool. We understand the importance of letting the Dominican public know what's going on. And you're absolutely correct. A number of our persons don't listen to the radio, they're probably not tuned in to the press conference. And therefore it is up to us as a responsible political party to go out to the villages, to the towns to bring the message. And that is what we plan to do. That will certainly be a big part of our process going forward, along with the electoral reform coalition to bring the message of exactly what we're saying here to the larger population.
One quick comment, question, sir. Can you, Dr. Thompson, the economist, paint a picture of what the status of our economy at this time? Because it seems that the government is not saying but they're struggling. What is the status of our economy? You can't barely pay your bill.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely correct. We're hearing of missed payments. We're now on the 13th of a new month, and you know that persons have not been paid. So the government appears to be struggling to meet some of its obligations. We continue to hear of the many persons in the private sector whose LPOs have not been honored. We are hearing about persons who are not giving any more services to the government because the government is such a bad creditor, such a bad debtor. They are not repaying on time. So there seems to be some cash flow issue that this government is experiencing. And it has a lot to do with the fact that this economy has not gone anywhere. As I said, some of the persons who were there recently, like the Haitians, are leaving in large numbers. People who are in the country saying that things are not moving. So it is very clear to me, as an economist, that this country, this economy is stuck in reverse. We're not going forward at all. And you will find a lot more of that happening. What you'll also begin to see, as we have seen already, is some arbitrary increases on electricity, on water, on different on port charges, on taxes and duties and so on, because the government is in a desperate state of trying to raise resources. It also owes the National Bank close to $390 million, which is putting a tremendous stress on the financial system. So we have a situation where this government, and probably that's when the talk of the snap election is coming on, probably people feel that things are so bad that it's about to snap, right? That's why they are talk of snap elections. But you know, seriously, things are not good. Persons there living it through are seeing it, and it shows and it tells me that this government has failed. And they probably are not comfortable enough to spend another 5 years trying to fix the issue. But it is a big problem that will only get worse. We'll have, and it's just a matter of time, I believe, before public servants are not receiving the money in time. It's just a matter of time.
In a recent statement, you did say that it can be almost compared to the situation in Haiti.
I think so. With the exception, of course, of the public involvement and the crime and the violence and so on. But in terms of the actual economy, where you're not able to raise resources, you're not able to pay your public servants, you're not able to pay your workers in time, you can honor your bills. That's what this government is. So it's not far-fetched. It is certainly something that we are seeing where this government is in some serious trouble. All the more reason to give it electoral reforms and then look about elections afterwards.
Ladies and gentlemen.
No. Let me hear what she said.
You mentioned the issue of payments. I mentioned speaking on the payments of some networkers their concerns over not being paid. Just wondering if you have a repeat, if elected in the next elections, if you plan to continue that program.
Okay, that's a very good question. It's one that we keep being asked over and over again, and our answer remains the same, that we are not about just scrapping a program for scrapping its sake. We believe that the National Employment Program can be improved. We believe that in its current form, it is not serving the country well, and as such it has to be reformed. But let me assure that persons in this program that we will not be taking the jobs away from them. Okay? We'll have to find a way to reform it, to make it better, to make it more sustainable. But at the end of the day, any program that is aimed at helping people, helping our public in the situation that they're in, we'll have to look at and reform to make it better. So yes, to make it better, but not to scrap it.
All right, I wanted to leave this with the media. Finally, Mr. Host, Chair. And this is for those that are concerned about what happens next and what is it that we are going to be doing, whether we're going to lie down and play dead or not. Let me say that we have a responsibility to operate and to continuously improve a democracy that works for all of us, not one set alone. Okay? Everyone must have an equal voice, everyone must have an equal opportunity. And those to whom the people periodically transfer the power to govern, they must be held accountable to the needs of the people. We have an ugly situation in Dominica where the needs of the people are like the footstool of those in government. They can take 50%, 30% salary increases for themselves, leave the poor, suffering public servants with nothing, and that's good enough for them. Those are the kind of consequences that unfair elections have. And that is why we accept our collective responsibility to ensure free and fair elections with integrity, and we accept the counsel of the Caribbean Court of Justice on the way forward. Let me quote the Caribbean Court of Justice for you from that judgment of July 2022. Without free and fair elections, the value of the creation and maintenance of and respect for lawfully constituted authority would be fatally undermined. The consequence of such a denial of free and fair elections that a reflection on Caribbean history demonstrates includes loss of legitimacy, public unrest, and even revolt. In contemporary terms, free and fair elections are so fundamental to the democratic way of life that without it, the very legitimacy and sovereignty of the constitutional state is brought into question. The sovereignty of our constitutional state has been in question for a very long time. The only question remaining for us, the people of Dominica, is what are we going to do about it? This becomes a significant time in our affairs and how we work successfully together to get what we want. I thank you very much.
And on that note, I also want to thank you, members of the media, members of the executive of the United Workers' Party, for your attendance and your contribution to this press conference, and to our political leader, the Honorable Dr. Fountain, and the President of the United Workers' Party, the Honorable Leonard Swinton, for gracing us with their presence in this press conference. Now we charge you to go forward and help us inform, help us educate the population. And remember that what we are looking for is free and fair election that will lead to proper governance of our country. I thank you.